What if the heroes who were supposed to protect the myth of American power were actually the ones tearing it apart from the inside? In the last days of the Cold War and the first glow of the 90 seconds, a handful of action films slipped through the system, loud, bizarre, violent, ridiculous on the surface, but haunted by something uncomfortably honest. Ex-soldiers hunted for sport, sacred codes sold to the highest bidder, cops and killers blurred into the same silhouette under neon light. These movies did not elevate the legend. They exposed the rot beneath the poster. These are the 5 films that revealed what Hollywood tried to hide. In the early 1990 seconds, action cinema was reaching its breaking point. The heroes who once fought for freedom now fought for paychecks, revenge, or redemption inside systems already collapsing. Hollywood was still selling the fantasy of order-righteous violence, noble soldiers, clean justice but smaller. Stranger productions began to show what happened when those myths ran out of oxygen. The Cold War was ending, but its ghosts were still armed, restless, and out of work. These films were made in that liminal moment caught between war and peace, propaganda and confession. They were shot on budgets that could barely light the explosions they promised. But what they lacked in polish, they made up for in raw honesty. Each one was a confession wrapped in gunfire, a sermon disguised as a shootout. Behind every line of dialogue, there was a quiet admission. America's heroes were breaking down. They weren't supposed to tell the truth, but somehow, through the cracks in the industry's armor, they did. Let's rewind to the 5 films that crossed the line between entertainment and confession. Film 1, The Glimmer Man, 1996. They called him the Glimmer Man because you never saw him coming. Steven Seagal played Jack Cole, a detective with a past so secret, it blurred the line between soldier and monk. On the surface, it was just another mid-90 seconds buddy cop thriller, martial arts, wisecracks, and a string of ritualistic murders in Los Angeles. But buried beneath the explosions was a film about guilt, faith, and what happens when a killer starts praying for the souls he can't forget. Released at the tail end of Seagal's box office reign, The Glimmer Man looked like a studio attempt to humanize its coldest star. Yet the production was haunted by cuts. Scenes exploring Cole's spiritual torment were removed to make room for faster action. A subplot linking his CIA past to government-sanctioned assassinations vanished entirely. What remained was a fractured portrait, a man of peace trapped in a movie about violence. Seagal's character carried a small cross, often touching it before killing a gesture that was mocked by critics. But it wasn't meant to be cool. It was the film's quiet confession. America's icons of justice were no longer pure. They were mercenaries wearing badges, saints with blood on their hands. In the final scene, when Cole walks away from the wreckage, he isn't the hero who restored order. He's the last believer in a system that doesn't deserve faith. Film 2, American Samurai, 1992. In American Samurai, the sword is both a symbol of honor and a curse. David Bradley plays Drew Collins, an American orphan raised by a Japanese samurai master trained in discipline, loyalty, and restraint. But when his jealous stepbrother steals the family sword and turns it into a ticket for underground blood sport, Drew is forced to follow him into a world that feeds on the very thing their code forbade: spectacle. Released in 1992, this Canon Films production was marketed as a cheap imitation of American ninja or blood sport, full of brutal duels and bare-knuckle tropes. But beneath the sweat and steel lies a story about cultural betrayal, not just of Japan's samurai legacy, but of America's obsession with turning honor into entertainment. Each fight becomes less about survival and more about humiliation. Every warrior is filmed like a product, their dignity traded for applause. Behind the scenes, the movie faced censorship battles across Asia for its portrayal of ritual combat as a commercialized blood show. Several scenes of ceremonial suicide and the destruction of the ancestral blade were cut in most releases, leaving only fragments of the original narrative, the moral decay of westernized discipline. By the time Drew faces his brother in the final fight, the code is already dead. He wins not through wisdom or restraint, but with the same savage force he was trained to resist. The film ends as an unintentional prophecy, a culture that borrowed another man's code and broke it for sport. Film 3, No Contest, 1995. It was supposed to be a charity gala, a night of glamour, beauty, and harmless pageantry. But in No Contest, The stage lights become spotlights for terror. Shannon Tweed plays Sharon Bell, a former model-turned-reluctant hero, trapped inside a televised beauty contest hijacked by mercenaries. On paper, it was a straight-to-video Die Hard clone, one more formula action flick in a decade that churned them out by the dozen. Yet beneath its glossy absurdity lies something that Hollywood never meant to show: the exploitation machine turning on itself. Behind the glamour and gunfire, no contest exposes the dark symmetry between entertainment and violence. The terrorists broadcast every scream, every gunshot, as if the audience's thrill were part of the ransom. What begins as a rescue mission slowly becomes a mirror for the industry itself, where women are staged, lit, and controlled, only to be saved in the third act for one final applause. Director Paul Lynch, best known for Prom Night, framed it like a tabloid dream, all neon and danger, but the film's message leaked through the cracks. Even the heroine's name, Sharon Bell, sounded like a scream no one hears. Critics dismissed it as cheap, but beneath its VHS sheen was a cynical whisper about how the same system that sells fear also scripts redemption. When Bell finally takes back the stage, her gun trembling in the spotlight, it's not a victory. It's exposure, a live broadcast of how power keeps changing hands, yet always looks the same on camera. Film Fear. I Come in Peace, a.k.a. Dark Angel 1990. He said, "I come in peace." But every time he said it, someone died. In Craig R. Baxley's I Come in Peace, retitled Dark Angel in some markets, Dolph Lundgren plays Jack Kane, a Houston detective chasing what seems like a drug ring, only to discover the dealers aren't human. They're extraterrestrial harvesters, extracting endorphins from human brains and selling them like narcotics across the galaxy. It sounds like pulpy sci-fi madness, and it is, but beneath the explosions and synth music, the film hides a terrifying truth. Addiction and exploitation were no longer human weaknesses. They had become an industry. Made at the dawn of the 1990 seconds, when America's war on drugs blurred into paranoia, I Come in Peace was a film that disguised its social commentary behind absurd violence. The aliens' method, injecting heroin to flood victims with pleasure before harvesting their brain chemicals, was an exaggerated reflection of what Hollywood itself was doing, feeding people fantasy highs, then draining the meaning from it. Critics mocked the premise. Studios cut the darker scenes of corporate complicity, and the movie vanished from theaters after a brief run. But years later, it became a cult relic, a cosmic metaphor for an age where heroes and junkies were just two sides of the same addiction. When Kane fires the final line, "and you go in pieces," it sounds like a punchline. But it's really a confession. Earth didn't need invaders. It had already perfected the art of consuming its own. Film 5. Deadly Prey. 1987. They took Rambo's myth and stripped it of the flag. In Deadly Prey, Ted Pryor plays Mike Danton, a Vietnam veteran kidnapped by a group of ex-soldiers who train mercenaries by hunting men for sport. It's a film that, on paper, should have been just another piece of 80 seconds exploitation, sweat, bullets, jungle warfare, and vengeance. But under the camouflage lies something unsettling. The collapse of the American hero fantasy, exposed and left to rot in the open air. Directed by David A. Pryor and shot in Alabama for almost nothing, Deadly Prey feels like a fever dream, brutal, raw, and strangely poetic. Every gunshot echoes like a memory that refuses to fade. The villains are all veterans, too. Men who once served a cause but now sell death for entertainment. It's not just a story of survival. It's the ghost of a nation devouring its own soldiers. There were no studio executives sanitizing the message. No marketable gloss, just the smell of mud, sweat, and betrayal. In one of the most haunting shots, Danton, nearly naked and covered in blood, takes up his captor's rifle and screams into the trees. It's not triumph. It's trauma weaponized. By the end, the so-called prey has become a monster, and the film dares to ask, what happens when your training outlives your purpose? Deadly Prey wasn't just low-budget war cinema. It was a cracked mirror held up to America's post-Vietnam conscience. When the credits roll, there's no glory, only silence, and the sound of something human that's already been hunted out of existence. Bonus fact: the one they buried twice. Nemesis, 1992. Before cyberpunk became a brand, Nemesis was a warning. Directed by Albert Pune, The film follows Alex Rain, a half-cyborg assassin sent to eliminate android rebels, only to discover that his own government has become less human than the machines it hunts. Released the same year as American Samurai, it should have been Pyun's masterpiece. Instead, it was torn apart, recut, renamed, and forgotten. Nemesis was made on the edge of a dying era when independent directors still believed they could smuggle ideas into gunfire. Beneath its violent surface, the film whispered a prophecy. The future of warfare wasn't soldiers or nations, but data, control, and manufactured loyalty. Yet studio executives couldn't stomach its message. They stripped away scenes of moral collapse and rebellion, reducing it to another cyber-action chase. The theatrical version ran barely 90 minutes, but in the lost reels, Alex Rain questions not his mission, but his soul. In the uncut ending, long-suppressed Rain stands before a mirror, his face flickering between flesh and circuitry, whispering, "Maybe they were right. Maybe I was never real." It wasn't just about androids. It was about Hollywood itself, an industry replacing human stories with machine precision, emotion with spectacle. Nemesis failed commercially, but its failure was poetic. It saw what the others only hinted at, that the system doesn't need to censor truth if it can simply upgrade the lie. Some films fail on screen, others were never even allowed to fail. Across these 5 forgotten reels, a single truth flickers beneath the noise. The American action hero was never invincible. He was broken, reconstructed, and sold back to us, one bullet at a time. The Glimmer man prayed to a god who no longer answered. American Samurai fought for a code that didn't survive the plane ride home. No contest revealed how every spectacle hides a hostage. I Come In, peace turned addiction into industry. And Deadly Prey buried the myth in its own backyard. By the early 90s, the war had moved off the battlefield and into the mind. Violence became therapy, loyalty became a contract, and the camera, once a tool of witness, became a weapon of denial. These films were never meant to last. They weren't designed to win awards or shape genres. They existed to expose the system's nervous breakdown. When the reels fade to black, what remains isn't the glory of victory, it's the echo of a civilization confessing through its lowest-budget dreams. Every explosion was a prayer. Every cut, a confession. Every silence, a truth that couldn't survive the edit. Between real and real, the heroes didn't die, they just stopped believing in the story. 5 films, 5 mirrors held up to a myth we were never meant to question. From faith twisted by violence to honor sold for spectacle, these stories weren't about heroes saving the world. They were about the moment the world stopped believing in heroes. Now, decades later, the reels are still turning and the lies still echo. So the question remains, which of these films do you think came closest to telling the truth Hollywood tried to bury? Comment your answer below, and if you want more stories hidden between celluloid and silence, stay with us. Real Secrets, where the truth was always in the edit.